The Normans won at Hastings, and within a year their own bishops had handed them a bill for it, itemized man by man. A year of penance for every man you killed, and 40 days for every man you struck without knowing whether he died, and if you could not remember how many there had been, then you fasted 1 day a week for the rest of your life. None of that is legend, it is a document, and it survives, which makes it one of the strangest things to come out of the 11th century. You already know the battle, a day in October on a hill near Hastings, where a shield wall held until it did not. But what almost nobody tells you is what happened afterwards to the men who won. They went to confession, and the church was waiting for them with a number. The document is called the Penitential Ordinance, and it was issued by the bishops of Normandy, most likely in 1067, within a year of the battle, though some historians would put it as late as 1070. It carried papal weight because Ermenfrid, the bishop of Sion, was in England as legate for Pope Alexander II, and that authority is what turns a local scruple into a rule. So this is not a few monks being squeamish, it is the church at the highest level it had in the country, telling the army that had just won what winning was going to cost them. The tariff itself is where this gets strange, because of how carefully it is worked out. If you knew that you had killed a man, that was a year of penance for each one, so a knight who killed 10 was looking at 10 years rather than 1. If you had struck a man and did not know whether he lived, that was 40 days for every blow you could still remember landing. And if you had only meant to kill somebody and never actually struck them, that was 3 days, which tells you they were pricing intention as well as outcome. Think about what that means for a man who spent the whole of that October day in the front rank, because he is not counting to 2 or 3, and whatever number he arrives at is the number of years he owes. The clerks were not naive about it either, and they had a category for the men who had come for the money, because anyone who fought for personal gain, rather than for the Duke's cause, did the full penance for homicide, exactly as though he had murdered a neighbor at home. Everybody else fighting in what the church was prepared to count as a public war got 3 years, and that was the merciful reading, which brings us to the archers, who presented the bishops with a genuine problem. A man shooting into a formation at 200 paces cannot know what he hit or whether it died, so there is no number for him to confess and no way for a priest to check one. So they were given 3 Lents instead, and that fixed penalty exists precisely because the arithmetic was impossible. That one clause tells you how seriously all of this was taken, because they did not simply wave the archers through, they sat down and worked out a rate for a man who could not count his own dead. And for the rest of them, the ones who had lost count entirely, the document has its heaviest clause. You fasted 1 day a week for the remainder of your life, or you gave alms in perpetuity, or you built a church. And it is that last option which ended up changing England. A penance you can discharge with money is a penance the rich can buy their way out of. And the Norman aristocracy had just helped itself to the wealth of an entire kingdom. So the men who could not count their dead built instead, and William himself founded an abbey on the battlefield with a high altar placed where Harold was said to have fallen, which is why the town there is still called Battle. Across England and Normandy in the decades that followed, the new landowners endowed monasteries and pulled down English churches to rebuild them bigger, on a scale the country had never seen. Some of that was piety and some of it was politics, but some of it, according to the document those men were living under, was simply the invoice being settled. Which raises the question this film is actually about, because why would the church bill the winners at all? The church had a problem, and it was one the church had made for itself. According to William of Poitiers, who was one of William's own chaplains, the invasion sailed under a banner sent by the Pope, which means the conquest of a Christian kingdom had been approved in advance. Treat that carefully, because William of Poitiers was writing for the man he was justifying, and the banner does not appear in the English sources at all, so what we have is the Norman account of why the Norman invasion was lawful. But take it at face value for a moment, because the consequence is what matters. And if the Pope blessed the invasion before it sailed, then every Englishman killed at Hastings died in a war the church had already approved. And the bishop still sent the bill. That is the contradiction sitting inside the penitential ordinance, because the institution that authorized the war then went back to the men who fought it and charged them one at a time for everybody. The resolution is that these were 2 separate questions, and the 11th century was perfectly able to hold both of them at once. A war could be lawful, and killing a man was still killing a man, so the church could sanction the cause and still hold you personally answerable for whatever your own hands had done inside it. That is a harder position than either of the ones we usually hand the Middle Ages, because it is neither blanket absolution nor pacifism. It is a war that was permitted and a debt that was still owed. There is a second reason as well, and it is a good deal less lofty. The Conquest was not a war between two peoples in the way we tell it, because Harold's army and William's army were both Christian, answering to the same church and burying their dead the same way. Hastings was not a crusade, and there was no enemy of the faith anywhere on that hill. There were two claimants and a great many dead farmers, and the church had to find something to say about that. What it said in effect was that you may keep the kingdom and you will answer for the men, which brings us to the part where we tell you what we do not know. The ordinance survives in copies rather than in an original, and historians disagree about the date by as much as 3 years, which matters more than it sounds, because 1067 is a church reacting to a battle, while 1070 is a church negotiating with a regime that has already settled in. We also have no idea how thoroughly any of it was enforced, because a document telling men to fast for life is not the same thing as men fasting for life, and there is no register of compliance for the simple reason that nobody kept one. What we do know is that somebody thought it was worth writing down at that level of detail, and nobody sits down to draft a rate for archers unless he expects archers to come and ask. And that is the part the retellings lose, because the Norman Conquest gets told as a story about a hill and an arrow and a crown, while the men who were actually on that hill spent the rest of their lives being told what they still owed for it. They won, and they took the land and the titles and the cathedrals and the crown, and every one of them who could count knew exactly how many years he had left to pay.